On the show today, we are ranking the remaining games on Louisville's football schedule in terms of toughness. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to personally take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Now, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC. It's a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Begin your coaching legacy today. We're going to rank the remaining games on Louisville's football schedule in terms of toughness, numbers 1 through 10 remaining games. But before we do that, I want to ask that you join me in a moment of silence for those that tragically lost their lives on September 11, 2001. Thank you. We also express our gratitude and appreciation for those servicemen and women, first responders, bystanders, civilians, and even dogs that rushed into the Twin Towers that day to risk their lives to save others' lives. Although it was 23 years ago, your acts of service and bravery have not and will never be forgotten and are 100% appreciated. So we will always forever salute you. Thank you. 10 games left on Louisville's football schedule. We sort of have a better understanding of how the teams are playing or how good these teams are. So we've ranked the 10 teams in terms of toughness, the games in terms of toughness. 3 categories, we've broken them up into. The first segment will feature 4 teams, ranking number 10 through 7. Now, some will ask, well, why are you doing this when we're only 2 games into the schedule? Let me tell you something. Louisville has a weird third week bye. So I don't really want to start talking about the Georgia Tech game until next week. So it gives an opportunity to discuss some things. And we really hadn't talked about the games on the schedule since the preseason. We hadn't even watched those teams. And I think it's pretty interesting to point out the amount of parity. So a couple factors that went into these rankings really quickly. Road games held a little bit more weight when it comes to significance. Projection was key on here, how the teams are going to look when Louisville plays them, and much more. So let's go ahead and get into the rankings. I will say that 7 through 10, this category is titled must wins. No matter how you shape it, the Cardinals must win these 4 games, no exceptions. They're going to be favored in all 4, potentially by double digits in the majority of them. But I can't stress enough that Louisville cannot afford to lose any of these 4 games. We start with number 10. That is a road game on Saturday, November 16th against the Stanford Cardinals. Stanford, first season in the ACC. They opened up the year with a close loss to TCU. It was 34-27. They bounced back with an FCS win over Cal Poly. Pretty much a blowout victory. The reason this game is still number 10 on the schedule, it is number 10, and they're still a little bit further ways down the rankings, is because I still worry about the Stanford defense. I'm not convinced that even though it is a home game, that Stanford's going to have a great home atmosphere in late November when they're projecting to not be a great team. I know they have one of the better wide receivers in the conference and the country as a whole, but the offense is still trying to figure some things out. Yes, Ashton Daniels does seem to be the go-to quarterback there. He's averaging almost 200 passing yards a game. He has 3 touchdowns to 1 interception, and he is the team's leading rusher. So it feels like he is sort of the do-it-all type player in this offense, along with a pretty solid supporting cast at receiver with one of the better receivers in the country as a whole. I'll just go ahead and leave it there. Even though this is a road game, it's after a bye week. People think, well, Louisville should struggle because you're coming off of a bye week after you play Clemson, and You have to travel all the way out west. I hear it, but at the same time, I'm not. Like, this is a team that Louisville should beat. I would be surprised if Stanford is bowl eligible at the end of the season. So ultimately, Stanford lands at number 10 on these rankings for me. This was a pretty tough pill to swallow for number 9 because this was a team that I had identified as the number 1 trap game for the Cardinals coming into the season. And man, have they struggled. They almost lost the first game to a team that has been really bad over the past decade. They got a win against a lower level opponent, and then they lost this past week to BYU 18-15. Of course, I am talking about the SMU Mustangs, who will travel to Louisville on October 5th to take on the Cardinals. SMU is number 9 in this, partly because I had high hopes for Preston Stone at quarterback. He was really, really good in the AAC, and maybe I put too much stock into SMU showing out in a lesser conference. Stone has been replaced. It is now going to be Kevin Jennings starting at quarterback for the SMU Mustangs. Jennings started the AAC Conference Championship last year. He hasn't been all that terrible this year, but he hasn't been good either. SMU's offense has been rather pedestrian to start the season in the first and third game. Defense has been sort of respectable, but ultimately, offensively, they really haven't been all that great. And the question is, can they get into a shootout with Louisville and put up the points? I'm not necessarily so sure that they can do so. It is a home game for Louisville. You have that advantage. And ultimately, the difference between number 7 and number 8 as it relates with SMU is because both of these other teams, I say both of these other teams because it's the start of the season, but they still are undefeated. They're both 2-0. And they played probably better competition and haven't lost. So SMU sitting at number 9 in these rankings. Can they rise a little bit higher? I think it's possible, but they'll have to show they do have a bye week this week. Before Louisville, they have TCU and Florida State at home. So I think that for them to rise up the rankings, they have to look more convincing than they did to start the season. Number 8 is a true road game. It's one of the toughest places for whatever reason for Louisville since joining the ACC. Saturday, October 12th, Louisville will go to Charlottesville to take on the Virginia Cavaliers. The Cavaliers sitting at number 20 or number 28. Wow, that's a weird ranking. Number 8 in these rankings because I put them higher than SMU. I'm not necessarily convinced that they're a better team, but they're on the road, and that's going to be the deciding factor here. I think that for whatever reason, no matter how good nor bad Virginia is, this game is either a blowout or it's like extremely close, like one possession. It feels like there's no in between. And for the most part, no matter how good Virginia's been, it seems like more often than not, they're competitive with Louisville. Last year, Virginia was one of the worst teams in the ACC, and they took Louisville into the fourth quarter and made things very interesting. So now they're on the road. Anthony Calandria is back at quarterback. So Virginia is 2-0 to start the season. I would like to see the Cavaliers be a little bit better than maybe previously thought. They beat a Richmond team that they should have beaten, and then they also beat Wake Forest on the road. Wake Forest is also sort of one of those teams you have to wonder how good they're going to be. We'll get a good glimpse of Virginia at home this weekend. They'll play against Maryland, 8 o'clock kickoff on Saturday. That'll be a pretty solid sort of benchmark to see just how good this Virginia team maybe projects to be. But I think that Virginia at number 8, they're still a little bit further down the list because in the pecking order of the ACC, I don't see them really competing for the conference, maybe competing for the top half, but that is still to be determined. As I mentioned, this segment is must wins, and Louisville must win, or more importantly, avenge a bad loss from last season. I shouldn't have to tell you who that is. Number 7 is the Pittsburgh Panthers. Pittsburgh is 2-0. One more win, and they will match their win total from last year. They beat Kent State pretty handedly, And they went to Cincinnati, came back down 21 points, and ended up beating Scott Satterfield's team 28-27. Pat Narduzzi's squad, I think, ultimately is going to be better than it was last season. Kanata Monkfield looks really solid at wide receiver. Desmond Reed has been really good at running back, 293 yards, averaging about 9 yards a carry. I know the question was, how are they going to replace Rodney Hammond Jr., who's not playing this season, and he's looked fairly solid. Eli Holstein, the transfer from Alabama, who is playing at Pittsburgh this season. We'll see what he's going to look like later on in the year, right? Ultimately, I think that he's going to give them better quarterback play than we've seen the past couple seasons. So Pittsburgh's further down the list. I think they're better than Virginia. I think that they're better than SMU and Stanford. But still a game that Louisville should win, and they should win by double digits. I think this should be still a convincing win for the Cardinals. So all four of these games are contests that Louisville, they've got to win. They're must-wins. Coming up, we're going to talk about the games that I could see Louisville losing, but if they handle business, they're going to be just fine, and they're going to come out victorious. 3 games, numbers 6 through 4. We'll rank them on the next segment of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Hey, Louisville fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. That's Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football team to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the Louisville Cardinals? Well, you can recruit, hire staff, oversee camps, and handle scholarship distribution. Basically, you control every crucial detail of the program. Here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays. So your strategy not only determines the success of the season, but the legacy and future of the program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free and has no ads. 100% playable offline. You can play on the go wherever and whenever you want. Of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Louisville fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk, as it will allow your team to get off to a good start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Also want to take this time before the next segment to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, Louisville's schedule, the road games, I want to make it a point of emphasis to go to at least one road game a year. This season, it's all about going to South Bend and Notre Dame. If you go to Game Time, you can see the opportunities to get tickets to that game. And since I've downloaded the app, that is the only ticketing service that I will utilize. From the seat views before you buy, the curated deals that make it easy to find the best price on great seats, and much, much more. You even get a lowest price guarantee. So what that means is if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And into the second segment of this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week. Your team every day. The second portion of this ranking is titled Handling Business, because I could see Louisville losing all 3 of these games if they're not careful, but I think that they can win all 3 by handling business because they are going to be the better team in all 3 different situations. Number 6 is the next game on the Louisville schedule. That is the home game next Saturday, September 21st at 3:30 Eastern Time. Georgia Tech making their way up to the Derby City. Georgia Tech would have been higher up on this list had they not lost at Syracuse last Saturday. Sort of the steam of the Rambling Wreck has cooled off a bit, and we are now forced once again to predict how Georgia Tech or how good they're going to be, because I still don't know. Yes, they beat Florida State. So did Boston College. Like they beat Georgia State, but how convincing did they look? They looked better against Syracuse in the second half, but they dug themselves into a hole that they couldn't get out of. They are, I think, going to be at the top half of the ACC. They are better than the 4 ACC teams at the bottom part of the schedule that we just talked about. But what's preventing them from getting a little bit higher? Number one, it is a home game. And number two, that loss to Syracuse really kind of spoiled things. I think that the difference between 6 and 4 really isn't much, but one is a road, one is a home game, and the other team has looked convincing. Now, that might change after this weekend's game, but ultimately, I think that Brent Key's squad is pretty solid offensively. I think that they have the firepower to contend with anybody in the ACC on offense, but the defense still has some questions that have to be answered. They gave up 31 points to Kyle McCord's Syracuse offense, and they didn't really look convincing at any point during the game until Syracuse had pretty much began to pull away at that point. So Georgia Tech is at number 6 here. What's going to be a little bit controversial is ahead of them, I put at number 5, Kentucky. Now, let's get this out of the way because there is going to be probably 2 things that could happen. And for Louisville fans, it's probably the second that you would want to happen. But the first is that Kentucky loses to Georgia, and that causes them to sort of recalibrate, bounce back, and be around bowl eligibility by the time they play Louisville at the end of the year. Or they could completely derail because I know the vibes aren't great. The support for Mark Stoops probably couldn't be any lower. And that loss to South Carolina might have opened Pandora's box. So if Kentucky struggles down the stretch, they lose the games that you know that they're probably going to lose, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, Tennessee. They beat Murray State and Ohio. Let's say that they lose 2 out of 3 between Vanderbilt, Florida, and Auburn. I mean, you're looking at a team that, Mark Stoops could be on the way out. However, I'll say this. If there's one thing I'll give Kentucky credit for, they could be 0-11. But you best believe that they are going to play lights out against Louisville because for whatever reason, Mark Stoops has convinced them that we have to get up for this game. Like, this is our rivalry. You could make the case that if Mark Stoops hadn't beaten Louisville in the stretch that he has, he might not even be the coach in Lexington at this point. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but ultimately, Kentucky has been middle of the road SEC, but they've handled Louisville. Let's call it how it is. They've handled Louisville. And you can argue, granted, only thing that matters is the wins loss. Last year, Louisville was a better team. Mentally, they lost the game. They made the mental mistakes, and credit to Kentucky for rising to the occasion. It's one of those situations that this will always be a tough game because it's a rivalry game. It's at Kentucky at the end of the season. Kentucky usually plays better, the longer the season goes on, and Louisville's sort of the opposite almost. That's the reason why they're ahead of Georgia Tech in this game. And then also, you have to be able to beat them mentally as well. Louisville hasn't been able to beat Kentucky since 2017. It's time for that trend to reverse. Number 4, at Boston College. I know Boston College doesn't have really a great home fan base. It's not a tough place to play per se, but it is a Friday night game. Friday, October 25th, 7:30 kickoff on ESPN2. Boston College still trying to figure out how good they can be. They're ahead of Georgia Tech because this is an away game. Boston College has looked convincing against Florida State and Duquesne, and we'll get to learn a lot about them in the next 2 weeks when they play at Missouri and at home against Michigan State. The reason that they're ahead of Kentucky is because I think that Kentucky is just going to spiral downward through the rest of the season, and Boston College will be a better team. I think Thomas Castellanos will be a tougher matchup for the Cardinals. I truly think, I'm not sure how good they're going to get eventually, but I think Bill O'Brien is a really good fit up in the Northeast. That is, his area. He's a really good college coach, and he's a good offensive mind. So I think that this Boston College game is going to be tougher than a lot of people believe. But for me, they are going to slide in at number 4 in this hypothetical. And then there were 3. The 3 games left are ceiling-defining, playoff hopeful games for the Louisville Cardinals. Challenging games, no matter how you slice it. Louisville can win all 3. They can lose all 3. 50-50 matchups. You know the opponents. But what order are they going to land in? We'll discuss coming up on the final segment of Locked on Louisville. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have a little something different for you. I know the first weekend is come and gone for NFL, but now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And that, if that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's double your winnings for all of Sunday. September 15th, pregame moneyline bets Profit Boost will be live starting tomorrow, Thursday, September 12th. Visit your account page now to learn more about your boost, and visit the odds and 50% parlay boost for the Dolphins-Bills game on Thursday night. No better time to join FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Like I said, and then there were 3. Heading into the final segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Louisville, ranking the top 10 games. Well, we're ranking the 10 remaining games on the Louisville schedule in terms of toughness. Numbers 3 through 1. Playoff hopeful games, ceiling defining contests. Number 3. It didn't have to be this way. But when you lose to Northern Illinois at home, it has consequences in this hypothetical specifically. Number 3, at Notre Dame. It will be Louisville's first road game. They will play Notre Dame Saturday, September 28th, 3:30 kickoff on Peacock up in South Bend. The reason that they are at number 3 is because they haven't really looked all that good. Yeah, they beat A&M on the road. A&M really doesn't seem like all that great of a team. Their offense just hasn't gotten going. There's questions as to whether or not Riley Leonard fits, Mike Denbrock's offense. And then apparently Leonard has been banged up and is questionable for this weekend's game. So last year we saw an injury linger and affect his availability and effectiveness against Louisville when he played for Duke. It's high up the list because I think Notre Dame is better than the other 7 opponents on the list that are below them, but it's only at number 3 because I think that they are the worst of the 3 teams left on the schedule, and I think that the styles of play, I feel like Louisville has a better chance of winning this game than the other 2. When I was doing these rankings, I knew that the difference between number 1 and number 2 was going to spark some controversy. So, question of the day for this episode: what is the toughest game for Louisville remaining? I'll tell you which one isn't. Number 2 is the home game on October, 19th against Miami. Miami is currently the 10th ranked team in the country. They're number 2 here. It is a home game. Number 1 is a road game. Both of these teams are good. Miami might be the better team on paper, but they beat a Florida team that I'm not sure is going to be all that great. Yes, they did it on the road. But believe it or not, the verdict is still out on how good this Miami team is. And we're really not going to know that maybe until we see them play Louisville. Like they have Ball State, South Florida, Virginia Tech, and California. All those are going to be games that Miami's supposed to win. I hate to be that guy, but there's a real possibility that ultimately this could be a top 10 matchup. So how are they number 2? Well, by process of elimination, Clemson on the road is number 1. Louisville will travel there on October 2nd, after they take on Boston College on October 25th. The thing for me is that I'm higher on Clemson than most I know that Georgia embarrassed them. Georgia's going to embarrass almost everyone they play. That team is a buzzsaw. That offense or that defense is going to make any offense struggle. Cade Klubnik bounced back in a huge way against Appalachian State. I know it's Appalachian State, but still, I do think Clemson's a really good team with one of the better defenses in the country. And if that offense is able to get going in any capacity, it's going to be tough. They do have a bye this week. We'll know more about this team week 4 when they play NC State at home. But if Cade Klubnik can start to piece things together with a really good offensive coordinator in Garrett Riley, this takes number 1 for me. Don't discount the road atmosphere down in Death Valley Junior. Yes, I said Death Valley Junior. It's huge. That, like, if you put them together, I think Miami and Clemson are comparable. Is Miami the better team? Probably right now. But how much of a difference does that game matter with it being on the road? I think it does quite a lot. And also, I talked about beating a team mentally. Louisville has not beaten Clemson since joining the ACC, and they've gotten really close. I mean, 2013. No, I'm sorry, not 2013. 2014, 2015, 2016. You go on down the line. 2021. It's gonna make me mad just thinking about all the fumbles metaphorically that Louisville has had. How many games that they fumbled? How many games they've been right there but just haven't been able to beat Dabo Swinney's team? It's one of those, like, I feel uncomfortable predicting Louisville to win this game until they finally get over that hump. So it's a mental game. Can Louisville beat Clemson mentally? I mean, eventually they have to this year. Why can't this year be the year? They definitely can, but it's the mental aspect of it. It's the road game at Clemson, which is not an easy place to play. And you're playing a really, really good defense and an offense that I still think has the potential to be good. I'm not writing Clemson off after one game. So ultimately, at the end of the day, Clemson is number 1 for me because it's a road game. That's what the deciding factor was. If they were both home games, I would go with Miami. If they were both road games, I'd still go with Clemson because I went to the Miami game last year. It was a sad atmosphere. You could just tell that it's not a huge college town. I would say that Louisville fans were louder, and the stadium was about 60% to its capacity. So the road atmospheres weren't even comparable. But the fact that Clemson was a road game is putting them at number 1 for me. I want to know if you disagree. Give me your number 1. Hell, give me your numbers 2 through 3. What are the top 3 games in order in terms of toughness for the Louisville Cardinals? Drop a comment in the YouTube section below. The bye week continues. Obviously, we're going to get very creative with content. I think tomorrow is probably going to be a basketball recruiting episode. Don't hold me to that. Still trying to work through some stuff, but that is going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.